Okay, Lord is good. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Holy, holy, holy. It's the Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. The Almighty. That's one of the few statements in the book of Revelation that I still like to confess, to affirm. Well, I'm talking about power here. It's really all about power. Gospel of Christ. And I suppose you could say the Old Testament's all about power too. But even more so, so why should somebody believe in Jesus? It should be about power. I mean, he's got to prove himself to be God. Well, God has to prove himself to be God, not Jesus. Jesus is the mediator. He is the way to God. He is not God. He is the prophet of God. He is the sacrifice, the Passover, the one who has ended all the blood sacrifices, all the animal sacrifices, who has been given great power because of that. And so he's able to impart power to us, which is given to him by God because of that. So God is somewhat hard to please that way. So so Jesus had to go through all that to purchase authority, to supposedly able to help people, but yet if they don't tread lightly and they don't do the right things, then they won't get any benefits. You still have to do certain things. You have to believe. God is not going to. The God of Jesus is not going to give you anything if you don't even believe in him. If you refuse to even practice, you got to practice it. You got to practice belief. You've got to do some kind of practice at believing. People just say, well, I don't see him, so I'm not going to believe. Well, that's not going to work, because you have to practice it. You have to work at it. And I think it was William Shatner that said, if he gets to God and he finds out it's true, his excuse will be, I never knew. I never knew, right? Well, he never knew because he never cared to know. He never sought God. I don't like that word much. In other words, he didn't seek God. He never looked for God. He didn't care. He never knew because he never cared to. So let me get right into the material that I have here in the fourth part on the contradictions in the Gospel of John. So here's a verse right here, John 1:28, and this word Bethabara doesn't even appear anymore. They apparently don't even use that title for the area. It's these things were done in Bethabara, beyond Jordan, where John was baptizing. So here in the King James, it's calling it Bethabara. But yet, you don't, yet like I say, you don't see that on the map anymore. And the versions don't seem to use that. I didn't check the other versions, I don't think, on this particular verse, but I'll show you some other verses where they're referring to the same area, but they're not calling it Bethabara. But I have a reason for bringing this up. It's really not contradiction. It was a possible contradiction, and then I realized that I realized some interesting things about this account. So it has to do with the raising of the dead of Lazarus. And it just has to do with the location. Here's the Good News Bible, John 11:1. A man named Lazarus, who lived in Bethany, became sick. Bethany was the town where Mary and her sister Martha lived. Then the 6th verse of that same chapter, in the same version. Yet when he received the news that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. So he didn't really care, it seemed. He had a plan that we find out. He wanted to have him die so that he could raise him back. And then the 11th verse, Jesus said this and then added, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I will go and wake him up. So not long after that, he got the word from God that Lazarus had died. And he wasn't even saying he died, he just says he's just sleeping. And of course they wondered why he said that, but he told them that he died. Then we have John 10, which actually goes back to that. Actually goes back a couple of chapters. And Jesus went away again beyond Jordan into the place where John had first baptized, and there he abode. And I just noticed that they called it Bethania, which was confusing to me because Bethany and Bethania are similar, and then they actually call it Bethany. So some of the versions call the place where Jesus was Bethany. And I said, but wait a minute, I thought that Martha and Mary were in Bethany, so it was saying that he wasn't in the same place as where Lazarus was. So I had to figure it out. I had to figure out why there seemed to be a contradiction there, because then we have the ERV down there. These things will happen. These things all happened at Bethany. I said, what? On the other side of the Jordan River. This is where John was baptizing people. So I said, wait a minute. It's the same town. But it turns out it's not. But like I say, they called it Bethabara at one point, but now they don't. And then the ESV also calls it Bethany. So you have 2 places with the same name. These things took place in Bethany across the Jordan where John was baptizing. The same thing. The same word is used, Bethany. And so I got some information here. Bethany and Bethany beyond the Jordan is 16 miles apart. So I was saying, well, how did they get over there? Well, it turns out people believe that Jesus walked everywhere he went. So if he had to go to Bethany from Bethany, he'd have to walk. He'd have to walk 16 miles to get there. That's a long distance. And so I figure he'd probably walk about 8 miles a day. That's a good little distance to walk 8 miles. So it would take him about 2 days to get over there. But then I realized he walked everywhere. Well, there's no evidence that he rode horses or took some kind of a wagon at all. People believe that he walked everywhere he went. So I wanted to find out how far is it from Nazareth to Jerusalem. And so my calculation was that it was 85 miles. I have it right here. It is 85 miles from Nazareth to Jerusalem. But then I found out some say 75 and some say 91. And then I wrote here miles, all of which Jesus walked, supposedly. So I said, wow. So if he came in from the place he grew up in into Jerusalem, that's a long distance to have to walk. We'll just say 85, that's in the middle. 85 miles, that would take a week, at least, unless you're going to walk from the time you got up to the time you went to sleep. And I said, how far-flung is that from modern day? So you had to walk long distances to get to all these places. I never really realized that. But obviously, since there's no evidence that they all rode horses and they all mounted up and they took off, no. So I don't know why that is. Who knows? I mean, so long ago, it was really primitive, compared to now. So seemed like a contradiction, but then it turned out it was just a strange similarity in the name, and both places were called Bethany, but then they've used other names, so it's a little bit confusing. So now getting back to more contradictions, John 12, 23 and 24. And Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Well, it's only chapter 12. Chronologically, that's not true. And plus, he wasn't going to be glorified. He was going to be shamed. It was no glory in the crucifixion. It was somewhat of a disaster. Before he raised from the dead, it was a horrible thing. There was no glory in that. There was no glorifying of him. He was shamed. He was disgraced, really, until he rose back, and then people realized it was deliberate. It was deliberate that he wanted to get crucified. And I said, wow, who would submit to that willingly? Only him. So truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, or unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. So I said, wait a minute now, is that true? Now I went over that thing about the salt. It turned out that was that was a naive and ignorant statement to say that salt will lose its saltiness, because it turns out salt does not lose saltiness, ever. Never does. And so I said, well, wait a minute, this sounds like another one of these things that are just not true. He's trying to say that when a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, then it'll grow something, right? But it turns out that it doesn't die. Well, let me read what I put together here. Okay, this is very interesting. The embryos inside seeds are considered alive. But he probably didn't even know. He didn't even know that about embryos and anything like that. Oh, he wouldn't have said that. It says, even though they are in a dormant state, meaning they are not actively growing until the right conditions trigger germination. Essentially, a seed is a living plant embryo. Let me say that again. A seed is a living plant embryo, waiting to develop when provided with water and suitable temperatures. So he was trying to say that he was a grain of wheat, and he was going to fall into the ground, and then he was going to bear fruit because of it. But the analogy is wrong, because the grain of wheat doesn't die. But then I found out that the embryos of seeds can die. And that's why some seeds don't grow, because they are dead. So if Jesus had really died, then he would not have borne any fruit. A dead embryo means the seed will not germinate. So normally, a seed is not dead once it falls. It's ready to grow again. And so this statement is false to say that a grain of wheat dies when it falls, because if it does, then it's not going to grow anything. Once again, then we have John 12:31 through 50, a lot of verses here. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. No, that never happened. Plus, what is he even talking about? What prince is he talking about? He could be talking about the devil. Well, I call him a prince. Or is he a prince? But let's assume he's talking about the devil. He's claiming that the devil would be cast out. Well, he wasn't. He hasn't been cast out. It hasn't happened. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe he's talking about people, the princes of this world. And that's not true either. So you really can't, that's just not a true statement, really. It's not a true statement. No princes have been cast out, except when they die. Princes do die, but if it's the devil, he's been alive. Somehow he operates. He's being allowed to operate according to this. I mean, according to everything we know. There's no evidence that the devil is dead or anything like that. Cast out, kicked out? No. He can be kicked out of somebody's life if the power of God is there. But then that power of God seems elusive. Oh, yes. Probably a majority of churches don't even believe in the power of God, really. It goes on to say, if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all to myself. Well, why didn't he just say if I'm crucified? Because apparently they knew by the next verse that he was talking about crucifixion. But then he said, I will draw all to myself. Well, he hasn't drawn all to himself. He's drawn some of them, some people, but not all. He was very optimistic about that. But he said this, signifying what kind of death he was about to die. Right, so they understood that when he said lifted up from the earth, because I'm saying, what else could that mean? Could it have meant something else? Not that I can know of. Not that I know of. If you're lifted up from the earth, so I guess that means that you're crucified. But then the crowd answered him, we have heard out of the law that Christ lives forever. So they knew, so obviously they knew what that meant, he was just saying lifted up from the earth. And so they were saying, we thought the Christ wasn't going to be killed. But I mean, so he's really admitting here that he was going to be crucified. He's telling them, I'm going to be crucified. If you could replace the word and say, if I am crucified, I will draw all to myself. And so who knows who this crowd was? Was it the same crowd that wanted him crucified? Who knows? I think not. They were really especially bad people that wanted him crucified. Those were the worst of the worst. But then you say, well, that's the will of God, though. So they were doing the will of God, right? But then he says, how do you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? And then they say, well, who is this Son of Man? But he didn't answer that. He wouldn't answer that question. It's too bad. That would have been very interesting, because that would have revealed a lot of things, but he didn't want to reveal. He claimed he reveals everything. He claimed he revealed everything to people. I'll show that in another verse. But it turns out, but the truth is, he didn't reveal a lot of things. And he wouldn't even tell them why he kept saying that. He kept calling himself the Son of Man. So they asked him, who is this Son of Man? No response from him. And so I wrote here, another question Jesus wouldn't answer. Because then he goes on to say, then Jesus said to them, yet a little while, the light is with you. See, so he completely changed the subject. He just completely ignored that question. A pity. Walk while you have the light, for fear that darkness will come upon you. For he who walks in darkness does not know where he goes. This is a strange statement, because he seems to be indicating that only when he was on the earth walking there would be light. This is what he's saying here. This is what they claim he's saying. Let me read it again. He says, yet a little while the light is with you, walk while you have the light. See, so, because for fear that darkness will come on you, right? I like on better in this case instead of upon. Get rid of that. Darkness will come on you, right? This sort of denies the spirit reality. Because he's saying that he was the light. He said he was the light of the world, but then he said, you are the light of the world too. But he's indicating that somehow the light is going to be gone if he leaves. But that's not the way other Gospels talk about it, or just other verses. Because then he says, while you have the light, believe in the light so that you may become sons of light. As if it's all about just him being personally available. Well, that's not true at all. We need angels. Because I believe the Spirit is angels. Or the angels carry the Spirit. And we don't even understand it, anything more than that anyway. But there's no doubt that we need the Spirit force of God. We need the Spirit power to manifest. On the day of Pentecost, everybody was speaking in other languages, other earthly language, not unknown languages, but earthly languages. The people that speak in unknown languages use that as their evidence that they speak in unknown languages is good. But all those languages on the day of Pentecost were all earthly languages. But that was power, and they're all filled with the Spirit. And to be able to speak in another language they didn't even know is quite the dramatic display of power. And Jesus was nowhere around. It was done by God. See, that's how you know it's more than just Jesus. They're trying to make Jesus God. It's all about Jesus. No, it's all about Jesus to a degree. And then after that, it's all about the power, the angels, the mysterious angels whom nobody hardly ever sees. Nobody ever sees them. No, not really. You can just see, if you go to a church and hear a preacher talk, he's never seen an angel. Most of them. Far majority of them. The vast majority. But he keeps saying that. He keeps saying that somehow he's the light. And if he leaves, then believe in me, I'm the light. See, while you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of light. Yeah, it's not even clear, really. And then Jesus spoke these things and then departed and was hidden from them. So then he went away and hid. I mean, that could be interpreted as in, if you get some light from God, then, believe in it, and then walk in it. But why can't you get more later? What do you mean, while you have the light? I mean, that's what he didn't say, while you're alive. He didn't say that. It's cryptic. It's a cryptic bunch of words. It's a cryptic bunch of words that's not clear. It's not even clear what he's even saying, really. Totally. And then the next verse, this whole section has different contradictions in it. Verse 37, but though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they did not believe on him. Really? Let's see what this says here. So then it goes on, so that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Lord, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? So this is trying to say that somehow people don't believe. Nobody was believing his report, but that's not true, because it just says the opposite down a little lower. I'll show you. Then they go on about the business. I was going to look this up, and I said I'll do it later, and I never did it. Therefore they could not believe, because Isaiah said again, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, so that they should not see with their eyes or understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. And I find that a very inexplicable and strange thing. So if God wanted people to believe, he did it in a strange way. He blinded them and made them not able to understand and not able to see. Well, that doesn't make sense, really. Because if you the whole thing was about believing, and then they're saying, well, God wants us to believe, right? And then he says God blinded them, so they couldn't believe. And then he hardened their heart, made them arrogant and proud. So they couldn't understand, they couldn't see. And then it says, and be converted, and I should heal them. So he makes it. He makes sure that he's not going to have to heal them, because he's going to blind them. So if they weren't blind and they weren't hardened, then they would be believing, and then they would be healed. But he makes sure that they're not going to be believing and be converted, and he makes them blind and mentally insufficient, so they can't even understand anything. It's terrible. Terrible. Then it says, Isaiah said these things when he saw his glory and spoke of him. I don't think he saw his glory. I don't think he saw. There's no evidence that he saw the glory of Jesus. No. I was going to look that section up, and maybe I will, and do it next week, because maybe there's something in there. I think I'd like to go over that. That would be a project, to go find this and then look at it and then see what it's really saying. It's probably not saying much. It just says the same things. There's a lot of stuff like that in the book of Isaiah. There's a lot of good things, but there's a lot of things that don't make much sense in the book of Isaiah. A lot of things. Especially when he had to go, God supposedly commanded him to go barefoot and naked for 2 years. I just can't even believe that such a thing was done. So supposedly he was commanded to be barefoot and naked and go around like that. That makes no sense. And they explain that there was a reason for that. The book explains that it's because of something to do with it was a sign against some evil ruler, and that supposedly it was necessary to be a sign to them or a sign to somebody. I don't see it. I don't see it as anything really. So it's very strange. That's what it is. So the amazing thing is, in the next verse, we have a contradiction, a total contradiction of what we just read. That's amazing. Verse 42, okay? Still, however, even out of the rulers, many did believe. So I put that in bold on him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess, for fear they should be put out of the synagogue. So it's incredible. So they just go on and on and on about how God has supposedly blinded their eyes, hardened their heart. Who has believed our report? Blah, 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 blah. And the next verse is a total contradiction, saying that even the rulers, many did believe, right? Because look at the sentence that I originally wrote. Look at the sentence that I originally read right here. Though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they did not believe on him. Well, that's not true, because it just said now that many did believe. So that's a contradiction. That's contradiction. That's what it is. Verse 1 of the 13th chapter, and before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour had come when he should depart out of this world to the Father. No, that was not what was going to happen. He was going to go into the center of the earth. You got to have your sequence of events down correctly here. So having loved his own in the world, he loved them to the end. And then what about after that? Did he love them after the end? He didn't even end. He came back. Ridiculous. But the thing is, he keeps saying that, or remember, this is written by who knows who put this together, this Gospel of John, right? Somebody's narrating here. They're giving you their 2 cents, okay? They're giving you their 2 cents about what Jesus thought and what Jesus was supposedly doing at all times. And I think they were a little bit off. They weren't, they were a lot off, actually. Because, once again, it's saying that he supposedly knew that his hour had come when he should depart out of this world to the Father. Well, he had a lot to go through before he departed out of the world. He was going to be crucified. That was the event that was going to happen. And then he was going to go into the center of the earth. He wasn't going to the Father. And plus, this is only chapter 13. There's a long ways away before that even happened. So the events aren't even in chronological order at all. They're putting all these stories together and they're not even lined up right. It should have been said that before it came time for him to be offered, killed. It makes it sound like he was just going to ascend. He was just going to leave the world, fly back up to the Father. Well, no. They didn't even know what was going to even happen. And then the third verse in that same chapter, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. Well, that's not true either. The Father has not given all things into his hands. I don't believe it. And that he had come from God and went to God. I believe that. So I wrote here, God did not give all things into the hands of Jesus. No, it's obvious. But they always try to. This gospel is notorious. It's a coincidence that the false book of Revelation, false book of Rev, is constantly trying to make Jesus God at times. And so, and the name of that book was supposedly John. The prophet who wrote that book was supposedly John, and then this was another John, and in this John, he is also trying to make Jesus into God. This is where Paul got his belief that somehow Jesus was going to be God. God was going to make him God and then retire or whatever. Jesus has not been given all things into his hands. The Father did not give all things into the hands of Jesus. No, I don't believe that. Certainly not. In the 13th chapter still, a lot of verses. 21, when Jesus had thus said, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly I say to you, that one of you shall betray me. And the disciples looked one on another, doubting of whom he spoke. And then the verse that I am glad I set straight here. I finally got this straight. That says, this is the King James, now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. I've never liked that because it looks like he's got a homosexual relationship going on here. No, that's not right. I don't believe that he was laying on Jesus' bosom. No. And so we have the modern versions. We have the GNB and the GW, Good News Bible, and the one that's called God's Word, right? And they put it right. The GNB says, one of the disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was sitting next to Jesus. You know, this talks about the events that went on at the Last Supper, but it doesn't talk about what really went on as far as the broken body and the shed blood, the emblems of his death, partaking of them and so forth. But this does talk about it, but there's no record of it other than this. Actually, what happens here is that the supper had ended. See, we have no record of the supper. This is the same chapter, verse 2. You can't see, it's cut off over there. But the supper being ended, see, the devil having now put into the heart. So it goes on about that. Then there's a whole section where he washes their feet after that. And then way down here, it starts talking about where I have in the document, in the Word document, where they start talking about what happened. Well, I said there's no record of it, but I meant to say there's no record of the drinking of the wine and the grape juice and the breaking of the bread. There's no record of that. That's the most important part of it all. But for some reason, it's not here. But they do give you a little section here. So all this happened long after that part I just talked about. So there's a record of after the supper, because the supper had ended, and they don't say anything about that. I find that amazing. And then we have the GW that says, one disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, was near him at the table, right? That's better than him laying on his body. Much better. Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spoke. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, see, then again, this is still the King James, right? Said to him, Lord, who is it? Well, the other versions say, the GMB, so that the disciple moved closer to Jesus' side and asked who it is, Lord. That's what I'm going to believe. That's what I believe. And the GW says, leaning close to Jesus, that the disciple asked, Lord, who is it? That's the way it should be, because it just doesn't, it's not right. And then it's also prejudiced, this gospel. So the one whom Jesus loved, right? Also, he didn't love any of the other disciples. The rest of them, he didn't like him much, you know. Then we have the 31st verse, the same chapter. Then when he had left, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God shall also glorify him in himself, and shall immediately glorify him. And once again, I put this in here because he's not trying to say that the crucifixion was a glorification. Just not. No, the raising of the dead, that was glorification. When he rose from the dead, he came back. He was glorified then. But the first event was not. He kept referring to his crucifixion as some kind of glory experience, some kind of glorification. No. I wonder what would have happened if he had said, look, you guys don't like me, talking to the priests, right? And says, listen, I want to get killed, I want to get stoned, and I want a burial in a tomb afterwards. That's all I ask. You guys don't want me around? No problem. I want to get killed. I want you to kill me, stone me, and then and put me in a tomb, and see what they said, right? I mean, that's what he wanted. It would have been a lot easier to be stoned than to have to hang, to be nailed to a tree like that. But then they say not a bone of his body was broken. Well, so what? Well, I think it was prophesied of that. None of his bones were broken. So maybe, but then I guess he'd have to say, but I want you to hit me in the head. But then if it cracked the skull, that'd be a broken bone, right? I don't know enough about stoning, what people really die of. I imagine they hit the stones in the head. They hit the people in the head, right? And that knocks them out. It's horrible, really. There's nothing good about it whatsoever. And then eventually they just keep stoning them until they stop breathing. It's just horrible. So what does it matter? God can restore the bone to absolute, absolute perfection. Anyway, that wasn't the plan of God, but that would have been a lot easier death than to be hung out to dry, I wonder what they would have said. They said, look, you don't like me, you want me killed. Well, I want you to do it. I want you to stone me. We'll do it at a time and place of my choosing, and I'm going to make sure I get buried in a tomb. We have somebody there that's going to take me away afterwards. And you'll get rid of me. I won't be around. And that'll be the story, I wonder what they would have said. I mean, it would have worked out if they said, sure, fine, we'll do that. They wanted to do it. According to this gospel, they had picked up stones. They were going to do it, and somehow something stopped them. Probably God stopped them somehow. He didn't want it to work that way. In verse 33, little children, I am with you yet a little while. You shall seek me, and as I said to the Jews, where I go, you cannot come. And this is another strange statement, because it appears, he's just going away, and he's never ever coming back, right? Because he's saying, little children, right? And he says, you cannot come where I'm going. He went to the center of the earth. And another verse says, you'll follow me. Yeah, here it is right here. Next verse, 36. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where do you go? Jesus answered him, where I go, you cannot now follow me, but you shall follow me afterward. And I wrote into the center of the earth. See? So that would be another verse that would prove what I believe is that everybody's in the center of the earth. Nobody's in heaven. Nobody's way off in space with gods and way, way out, above or something. They're all in the center of the earth. They're in two different places, like the parable says of the story that he told. A good place and then a not so good place. But this was 6 chapters away from the crucifixion. So that's strange. So apparently he lamented and talked about the crucifixion for a long time before his death, on and on and on, as if it was going to happen right away. Because it didn't, obviously. If these stories are lined up right.